So today's gonna be kind of random. It's a beautiful day out. It's Saturday. I just got back from the gym. And there's some things in my kitchen I just need to use. I've been gone. I went and visited my parents for a little while and I just need to put some stuff in my freezer, use some things that are going bad, things like that. So today's gonna be kind of a random like prep day. I made a list of all the things I want to get done. And I don't know that I'll necessarily get them all done. Well, I know I won't get them all done today because the pizza dough actually like sits for 24 hours. So that'll be tomorrow. But yeah, I'm just going to prep some of this stuff before it goes bad, get some stuff in my freezer so that I have, you know, some different things ready to go when I need to cook. So one of the things that I wanted to get done was pizza dough. I like to have pizza dough in the freezer so like it's ready. Plus, I actually think it's way better in the freezer. Like if you let it sit for like a month in the freezer, personally, the pizza dough that I use, I think gets a lot crispier and I like crispy pizza. So anyway, I actually put it in the bread machine before I even left so that it would be finished when I got here. And I will link the recipe that I use the Tasty 101, but I did adapt it to be able to put it in my bread machine to do the kneading, and then I just let it sit for 24 hours. I either use it or I put it in the freezer, prefer it in the freezer. And then I could get my bread started for tonight. I'm gonna just do grilled cheese and soup for myself. I wanted to get that loaf in because I'm gonna use the sourdough setting on my bread machine and just see what happens. So yeah, I wanted to get that in before I took a shower because it takes like 6 hours. So we are going to jump to Jess from like 2 hours ago, who did the beginning of the pizza dough in the bread machine.
So I have the KBS bread machine. It said that it's the 2-pound loaf. I actually didn't realize that. So it's a pretty decent size and it does hold a lot. Now, when I make this recipe, I cut it in half, and the reason why is because it will not fit. Like if I do the full recipe, it actually won't fit in the bread machine to mix up. So I do a half a recipe, and it makes 4 personal size pizza dough crust. I also want to point out that usually I take a spoon and scoop the flour into my measuring cup and then level it out and put it in. But I actually noticed that when I was making the pizza dough crust, when I did that, my dough actually turns out way too wet. So you do kind of need to scoop it. Like it really should call for a little bit more flour, to be honest with you. So I do scoop it so I'll get like the compact amount of the flour. I also want to say if you don't have a bread machine, you absolutely can make this with a dough hook and like a KitchenAid or by hand mixing it. I just prefer this method because I have it and it just does the mixing for me and I can go and do whatever I need to do. If you are using a bread machine, you're just going to do one of the dough cycle, and I do use the one that has like a rise in it just to do that first rise. You wouldn't have to do that if you didn't want to. And you can also sit your bread in the fridge to do its long 24-hour rise if you want to. I just leave mine out. And then for those of you who work out and drink like a pre-workout, I really want to show you this. I have a stainless steel blender bottle and I absolutely love it. It's the Simply Modern and I get it off of Amazon. It is my favorite blender bottle by far. And I also use the Amazing Grass Green Blend Energy, and that's what I drink kind of while I work out. It's not sponsored at all. This is just the green drink that I literally have been using for the past 10-15 years. And I'm not a big fan of pre-workout, so I just wanted to share that there are alternatives out there if you also don't want a pre-workout but you want some healthy energy.
Okay, so we are back from what I did like 2 hours ago. Went to the gym. Now I'm gonna get everything out of the bread machine and get it into a greased bowl and up on the top of my baker's rack so that it can sit and so I can cut it up into 4 doughs tomorrow. Okay, so I just grease my pan, or not my pan, my bowl. Sorry, my brain is shot. It's Saturday. And then I'm just gonna pull my dough out and you'll see how lovely it is. It turns out so good when I do it in here. It's so easy. I didn't put flour on my counter. I don't know where my brain's at. It actually feels a bit sticky, so I'm gonna add a little bit more bread flour to this. There we go. Yeah, that's feeling better. And I'm just gonna knead this for just a minute. I don't really know why I think the dough is so much better out of the freezer. My family and I actually will make this a good bit early and just keep like 4 to 8, doughs in the freezer. It's still a little bit wet. But yeah, we'll keep like 4 to 8 little personal size pizzas. Just the dough already ready. And then all you have to do is just pull it out like that day of, put it in the fridge, and then follow like the normal directions. Like you'll want to pull it out like an hour or two to come to room temperature before you're going to make the pizza, and then, let it do its rising and all of that. All right, I'm just going to put this in this pan, and we're going to drizzle a little bit of oil on top and then put some saran wrap. Then I'm just gonna take my tea towel, put on top, and we're gonna sit it up on my baker's rack for 24 hours. See if I can do this while doing it through the camera. Okay, I'm gonna clean this up a little bit, and then we're gonna get the loaf of bread started, and then I'm gonna take a shower. One good thing about doing all of this on one day is I don't have to like wash stuff multiple times. I just rinsed it out, and I'm gonna use it now. I am gonna do my regular bread recipe, but I'm gonna use my fresh milled flour because I want it to be a little bit more hearty tonight. All right, so I just got a half a cup of water out of the Berkey, and I'm gonna do half a cup of milk with this. And then we're gonna throw this in the microwave for just a couple seconds and warm it up. Okay. So 1 cup of warmed liquid. And I've played around where I used all milk or all water. I think it's just a preference. And it's just 1.5 tablespoons of olive oil. And you could use avocado oil here. I just like using olive oil in breads. I don't know why. And then 2 tablespoons of honey. I did have to warm this honey up a little bit, so I'm hoping it'll work. It's kind of crystallized, you can see. So we'll see if I can get it out easily. Oh no, it's definitely not coming out easily. All right, so I actually got a different thing of honey because that was just gonna take so long to warm up. And this one has not crystallized. So we're just gonna use it. 2 tablespoons of honey. I think I've said this before, I don't mind if it's a little extra honey. Okay, so I'm actually gonna go ahead and add a little bit of my sourdough starter that I fed the other day, and then I will refeed it today. And I'm not necessarily making this like as a sourdough, I am just adding some. And the reason I wanna try the sourdough cycle is because it takes a little bit longer, and I found with fresh milled flour, you really want to give it like extra time to rise, and I just want to see if I can bake it in the bread machine on that sourdough cycle, and it would give it that time for the liquid to absorb into the fresh milled flour. I'm actually glad I said something about the liquid because I forgot. With fresh milled flour, you want to add like a little bit more liquid. I believe it's like 2 tablespoons per cup. Is what like I've seen roughly. I know hard wheat and soft wheat, like it's a little bit different. Some say like 1/4 of a cup, some say a little less than 2 tablespoons. I have found that just 2 tablespoons per cup has been good for this bread. So this calls for basically 3 cups of flour. So I'm just going to put 6 tablespoons, and I'm gonna use milk. Now I'm gonna measure out my grains, and I'm gonna use a mixture of spelt, hard red, and hard white. I don't really have like a recipe for what I do. I just kind of eyeball it. I really like spelt a lot because it gives it like this buttery smell and taste. And honestly, I don't love the hard red taste, but I have this whole jar, so I'm using it. So I'll probably do like mostly hard white, a little bit of the red, and then a little bit of the spelt. I'm gonna measure out 460 grams. think I'm gonna do 300 grams of the hard white. We're gonna do 275. That's just what I'm feeling. I'm gonna do maybe 60 or 70 grams of the hard red. And then the rest of it I'm gonna do spelt. And I am measuring out the weight of the wheat berries because in my mind, when it mills, it's gonna be the same weight. And this calls for 460 grams of flour. So we'll see if my math is working. And I love this little bowl. My cousin actually made this for me over the holidays. She's like really big into pottery, and I asked if she would make me something like this, and I just think she did such a great job. I love it so much. I just think it's adorable. All right, so it's at 456, which is so close. I guess there's just a little bit like left over in the mill or whatever. So I'm just gonna put a little bit of bread flour to make up the difference. I don't think you'd have to, but I'm a precise person as I go over. So I guess not that precise. It is what it is. It's actually kind of hard to do things through your camera. You tend to like, I don't know, if you're looking at it through your camera, you tend not to do it quite as well. So this might actually seem a bit odd. Even though I put sourdough in there, I'm still gonna add a little bit of yeast. Because like I said, this isn't really like a sourdough. I've just put the sourdough in there as like a little bit of extra benefit. Just quick foreshadowing, do not add the yeast. So I just put a teaspoon of yeast and I'm gonna do a teaspoon of salt. Okay, it is time to see what the sourdough option does in the KBS. And I'm gonna do a full review on my KBS. I have a review of my mom's zojirushi, which is a great bread machine, but honestly, for the price, I love my KBS. Works really, really well for me, but I'm gonna do a full review. And you see 6 hours and 44 minutes. So we're gonna go ahead and get this started. I'm gonna go take a shower and we'll come back and finish everything in a few. So one of the other things I had ran out of was my cereal. So I just quickly threw actually 2 batches together. So here you'll see I had 2 mason jars, and in each mason jar there is 1.5 tablespoons of olive oil or avocado oil, and then 3 tablespoons of honey and 3 tablespoons of maple syrup. And you just mix that up, and then 1 jar to 1 bag of puff kamut is what I have found is really, really good. So you just mix that up, add a little bit of salt, and then really it's just mix, and mix some more because you want all the kernels coated. And then you're gonna put it on a parchment paper lined baking sheet and just bake it in the oven at 250 for about 40 minutes, 35, 45, depending on how hot your oven gets. And you just want to make sure you're also stirring it every 10-15 minutes so that it doesn't burn and all the kernels, you know, get that nice baked crispy exterior. And I did mix these up separately. I just found it's easier to handle if you work with them one at a time. Now the other thing I needed to do was actually use up some of the chicken stock that I had in my fridge that was gonna go bad. I had made something the other night and used it, and if I didn't go ahead and get this in the freezer, then the chicken stock would go bad. So I just put it in an ice cube tray, put it in the freezer, let it freeze, and then I put it in a bag later on. Right now you're gonna see where I'm doing my first stir
stir of my cereal. It's actually kind of difficult because the kernels want to go everywhere. So if you have bigger sheet pans, I would definitely suggest it just to give it that space. But just do it slowly and kind of pull it from the inside, and it shouldn't be too terrible. And like I said, you're going to want to do this every 10 to 15 minutes. And you'll see that I'm kind of just pushing and pulling it to the center. This is the way I found is the least messy way to flip the kernels. Now, the next thing I needed to use up were my bananas that were going bad. I actually had 6 bananas that were about to not be able to be used. So I decided just to go ahead and make some banana bread and put some of that in the freezer. I'll put the recipe that I used below. Of course, I spilled an egg. But anyway, yeah, it's the Tasty 101 and it's the chocolate chip banana bread. And I just don't put the chocolate chips in it for this one. They're good with the chocolate chips. It's just I decided not to use it this time. So I did have to stop and do the cereal one more time. That's the biggest thing about the cereal is just having to move it around every 10 minutes. So I've actually made this so much now, the banana bread. It literally is just 3 bananas, and with this recipe I doubled it, so I did 6 bananas. And then you're just gonna add some butter, and I will put the recipe below so you can have the exact measurements. Like I said, I doubled this one, so just to make it easier because I had 6 bananas, but you're going to put 1 beaten egg in there, then a little bit of sugar, and then you're really just mixing it up. It's that simple. And I'm personally a huge fan of banana nut bread, and this is one of my favorite recipes. And you'll see I'm adding a little bit of vanilla. Always add a little extra vanilla personally, and then some baking soda. Finally, you're gonna add a little bit of salt to taste and let that mix. And then I decided to use some soft white wheat for this. I found with the banana nut bread, you can use all fresh milled flour and it has a great taste. Now, if you don't have a mill, totally fine. Just use all-purpose flour like the recipe calls for. I just think that banana bread, pumpkin bread, things like that handle the fresh milled flour really, really well. So one thing I have learned is you have to kind of eyeball the consistency when you're using fresh milled flour. With this, add, kind of what it calls for, maybe a little less, and then add more if you feel like it needs it. And so, right here you're seeing I added just a little bit more because I felt like it just needed to be a little bit thicker. Then I added my walnuts in, let that mix and break those up a little bit, and then it's ready to sit. With fresh milled flour, I like to let my dough or whatever batter sit for a little while. So I just let this sit for 30 minutes, and that's just letting the fresh milled flour absorb some of the moisture. Then also I've started putting any of my extra milled flour that I have left over in a Ziploc bag and throw it in the freezer. And then when I have enough, I'm just gonna make a loaf of bread with the mixture of flours. I've done this one other time and it worked out really well. So it's just a fun little way to not waste any of that fresh milled flour. So then finally the cereal was finished and it was time to put them into the mason jars. And I just started off using my hands because I just wanted to get rid of a little bit the bulkiness of the cereal. It's really hard to pick the parchment paper up when there's so much in it. So once you get some of it already into the jar, then you can pick the parchment paper up and just kind of slide it in. It does tend to be kind of a messy process. Or maybe it's just for me, I tend to spill because I'm a messy person. But if you make 2 recipes like I did, then you're going to have 2 half-gallon mason jars and then like a pint jar worth of cereal, a little bit less. And I have to say, my timing was pretty spot on for the day. As soon as I finished with the cereal, my banana bread was ready to go in the oven. So I just threw that in and then baked it until I could put a cake tester in it and it would come out clean, which was about 50 minutes at 350 degrees. So pulled those out, let them cool, and I cannot even tell you how good the house was smelling.
Okay, so everything on the list has pretty much been completed that can be completed today. Banana bread is cooling on the cooling rack. The cereal is done, the chicken stock's freezing, the pizza dough is fermenting, and the sourdough bread is still cooking. So I will bring you guys in for a minute just to show you the sourdough once it finishes. And then I'll want to do the pizza dough tomorrow, get the chicken stock into bag, like into a Ziploc bag in the freezer, and then go ahead and cut up the banana bread and get that in the freezer also. I like to cut it up and then put it into single servings into a freezer bag. So we'll do that tomorrow after it's completely cooled, and we'll get that in the freezer. So yeah, it's a long day, but got a lot of things just kind of prepped and ready to go. So I will see you when we pull the sourdough out in like 2 hours.
Okay, a little bit sad about the sourdough. It definitely deflated. It tastes delicious. I ate every bit of it, but it did deflate. And so I did a little bit of research. Looks like what happened is me adding the yeast on top of the sourdough and then letting it do the sourdough rise. It said it actually fermented too long, and that is probably what led to it deflating. So I'm going to try it again without adding the yeast and just using my sourdough, and I will let you guys know how that turns out in the comments. Then I went ahead, because the banana bread had cooled enough, I went ahead and wrapped that up to go ahead and get all of that in the freezer, just so I'd have, that ready to go. Here's me cutting the sourdough just to show you the inside. I mean, honestly, it tasted delicious. The way it felt was great. I made toast, as you can see, with some peanut butter and strawberry jelly the next morning. Turned out great, just deflated. So quickly, I did have 2 things on my list of things I wanted to do for the weekend that were not related to cooking. One of them was changing out the actual labels on some of my ingredients. So I had like one of those handheld label creators that you would just, move it and cut it. I think they're called like carbon creators. I'll put a picture up. And it was great, but it kept breaking and I'd have to keep buying them. So I bought like one that you could print. This is what the other one looked like. It had like the black with like the stamped names on it. Looks cool, but just wasn't working. So I bought this little label creator that you just print the labels and you can put them right on the jars. And I decided not to put it on the jars that I knew what was in it, just because of aesthetic reasons. And this one, even you could put the expiration date, which was really cool. So you can print kind of whatever you want, put it on your jars, and they come off really easily. The next thing I needed to do that morning was get the chicken stock into a Ziploc bag. And I did have these like reusable freezer bags. I'm just going to be honest, it didn't work. You could get the air out of it, so you see me putting it in here. However, you'll see me get a Ziploc bag, because this just did not work. I could literally squeeze air in and out of it, and I didn't want to mess it up and let the food go to waste. So got a Ziploc bag, freezer bag, and just threw it in there and put my date and threw it in the freezer. Then the last thing I had to do was my pizza dough. So I just pulled that out, put a little bit of flour on the counter, and then I did weigh my dough out just so I can make sure I was doing it evenly. And you're just going to knead it a little bit, weigh it, and then cut it into 4 for this half a recipe. So I got my weight, figured out how much I needed, and then did individual little dough balls. And you just literally wrap them and kind of just create individual little small dough balls. So once the dough is ready, and this one actually was a little bit stickier than I wanted, so I added a little bit more flour. It's a lot easier to add flour than it is to add liquid. So if it's not feeling, perfect, you can add a little bit more flour just to stiffen that dough up a little bit. And then I wrap each one individually in saran wrap, and I do I could wrap it twice in 2 different individual saran wraps. And that's just the way I know to do it. I took one and only wrapped it once so I could test it and see, what it did. But for the most part, I wrap each one twice with saran wrap. And then I put it into a Ziploc bag in the freezer. Now, I'm not sure why. I am not a chemist, but I do think it tastes a lot better in the freezer. I let it sit for a minimum of a week. You can use the dough right away. However, I like to let mine sit in the freezer for at least a week. But honestly, if you can let it sit for like a month, it tastes even better. It just comes out really, really crispy. I'm not entirely sure why. Now, the very last thing I wanted to do was clean out my green stock. I just wanted to get it ready to go when I was ready to plant. So I just needed to get rid of all the old potting soil. So overall, this was a great weekend. I got so much done. Everything on my list that I needed to get done was finished. The chicken stock in the freezer, the banana bread in the freezer, pizza dough in the freezer, and then all the cereal for the rest of the week, or actually for the rest of the next couple weeks. Is all completed. So I used everything that was expiring, and overall just a great getting things done kind of weekend.